Greetings for those of you following the RCP. I'm just doing a brief introduction of a presentation I did with the Red Pill Expo. This is a group that was started by G. Edward Griffin. That may be a name. If you're following things with the Federal Reserve, you probably know that name. But Mr. Griffin has gone out of his way to really try to educate people, to red pill them about what's really going on in the world. And I had the distinct honor of being able to present to the community in November of last year. And they've just now released the presentation so that anyone can view it. So I thought it'd be kind of fun for you all to have access to it. It was a fun presentation to do, and look forward to you having a chance to view it. And then if you have questions or comments, please contribute, and look forward to our ongoing dialogue. But thanks for taking the time, and I hope you enjoy this particular episode. Take care. Bye-bye.
I'm excited about the next speaker, Ed. I mean, we talk about gold a little bit. I've talked about silver and copper. Our next guest really talks about copper a lot as well, but in terms of its nutritional value, not just its economic value, but of course, if we don't have nutrition keeping us alive, what good is economics? So I think it's a very important topic that we see thematically run through the Red Pill Expo. People that have great knowledge of how to restore the frame of our functionality, right? This body that we've been given, which is a great gift. So if you don't mind, we will turn it over for the next hour to my good friend, Morley Robbins, who has written extensively on this subject, and one of the greatest books on copper ever written, Cure Your Fatigue, CU for Copper. In addition to other things, he's going to talk to us about the ugly truth about natural, in quotation, supplements. Morley, good to see you, buddy.
Likewise. How you doing?
Doing great. We're excited to hear from you today.
Well, I'm excited to be here and talk about sliding in right under the wire, but we're here. We're good to go. And very excited to hear Andy Scheckman talk about gold. And yes, you stole my thunder. You know.
Not intentionally, Morley. You'll take it and rumble it even more, and we'll let you go if you're ready to go for the next hour or so and learn a lot from you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Robert.
All right. Here comes Morley Robbins.
Well, good morning. My name is Morley Robbins. I'm the founder of the Root Cause Protocol. I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank Alex Newman for the nomination and Mr. Griffin for accepting that nomination. I've been asked to talk about the ugly truth about common natural supplements, but I'm going to put my spin on it and talk about, or put an additional spin on it as it relates to the importance of copper and ceruloplasmin and why they matter. I think you're going to enjoy what you learn. It's going to scratch the record of what you think is right and wrong, but that's familiar turf for those of us within the Root Cause Protocol. So thank you again for the chance to be here. The Root Cause Protocol is really designed to optimize energy production. We're very focused on making sure that the oxygen that gets to our mitochondria becomes ATP with minimal exhaust. And that's the name of the game. And it's what allows us to stand out in a very crowded field of practitioners and programs that are really trying to improve people's health. I think you understand the importance of passion, and the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. Well, I'm not reasonable. All progress depends on the unreasonable man. And as I pointed out on my courses and my classes and things like that, between now and rest in peace, I'm going to be anything but reasonable about this ironic issue that's confronting humanity. So more about that as we get into the slides. I really started this process. You know, I spent 32 years as a hospital executive. and was always fascinated by why everyone was so sick. But about 15 years ago, I was thrust into a deeper exploration of what's going on. And I started with two questions. Why is everyone so sick? And how does anemia exist on a planet where iron is the number one element? 36% of the Earth's composition is iron. And what I discovered along the way, in a very elaborate process of discovery, is that this protein, this copper protein, ceruloplasmin, that most people have never heard of, is the key to both questions. When you've got proper ceruloplasmin, you're recycling iron and you're able to avoid anemia. A client just texted me this morning with a new phrase. He said, I think you need a new phrase to talk about this anemia thing. And he was talking about his personal situation is that he has very high ferritin, which is in the body, but very low hemoglobin and serum iron in the blood. And he terms it ironic anemia. I think that is just priceless, and I'm so grateful to him for that suggestion. So what's the problem? We're not able to produce ceruloplasmin the way we were designed to. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward. Wonderful book for those of you who are readers and really want to get a bird's eye view of where the problem is. It's our soil. Well, actually, the food that we're eating is being grown in dirt, and it needs to become soil, and that requires animals. But Gabe Brown has done a masterful job of sharing this whole process. And he highlights a friend of his, Don Campbell, who says, if you want to make small changes, change how you do things. But if you want to make major changes, change how you see things. And that's really what I want to do in this presentation, get you to see things differently. And it's as simple as a kaleidoscope. Just a very small twist, as you know, makes all the difference in the image that you actually perceive. So that's really what this presentation is about. As you probably know, there's a lot of mythology that's running medicine and nutrition, and this has been going on for many, many decades now. And I'm always amazed at the confusion that people have around this. These first four, the cholesterol myth, saturated fat myth, salt myth, and calcium myth, have all been debunked thoroughly. The bottom three we're not really supposed to talk about. Sugar and mercury and fluoride, very taboo, although I think there may be some change in the wings with the political shifts that are occurring. But the one that confuses people the most is the one that's in the middle, the vitamin D myth. For anyone who's followed my work at all, you know my stance on that. I think the D stands for deception. I've got a lot of research to back that up. And we won't have the opportunity to go into that now, but just know that there are ample videos and courses out there that get into that detail. The bottom line, we have been misled and we have been misfed. And I think it's time to correct that. So Alex de Tocqueville once said, it's easier for people to believe a simple lie than the complex truth. Actually, I think it was Lao Tzu around 600 BC who said it first. He didn't say it in English, though, of course. But the masses like to follow the simple but wrong approach. Within the RCP, we're very focused on complex but right. Not as many people, but they're acting in integrity, both in their understanding of how the body works, but how their physiology works as well. So a classic example of simple but wrong is cardiovascular disease. Number one cause of death since 1910, certainly here in North America. And we know that cholesterol causes heart disease, right? We've been trained very carefully to believe that. Statins are now the number $1 trillion product on the planet. Got to spell it right, $, TATIN, $. And turns out mitochondrial integrity and the LDL fractions are mysteriously compromised, but no one seems to talk about that. So the complex but right situation is, well, Turns out that cholesterol absorbs light. Wow, beautiful. Photons are very, very important. It takes 11 molecules of oxygen to make 1 molecule of cholesterol. Uh, Oxygen has photodynamic energy, which is activated by bioavailable copper. That's buried in the literature. I'm not sure that it's taught in doctor school. As we know, people in northern climates have less light, more cholesterol, and less vitamin D for a reason. Cholesterol, it turns out, is the precursor to vitamin D. The great mystery is, how did the nation, the United States, become the nation with the highest cholesterol, but yet the lowest vitamin D? And it's all related. Turns out that B9, folate, is the key for this conversion. But what most people don't know, and I'm very grateful to Leslie Clave for this bit of wisdom, is that folate has copper as its catalyst, which is a very, very important biochemical property to know. And turns out that copper is a magnet for sunlight, has very photodynamic properties, and copper deficiency causes cholesterol to rise. Dr. Clave's contribution to the field of cardiology was to point that out in 1973 when statins were just first being developed, and for his statement to become science. Only one other lab had to replicate his findings. Well, it turns out over 30 labs now have replicated his findings. It is beyond science. And it turns out there are 80 anatomical, chemical, and physiological defects in a copper deficient heart. So copper is very, very important in this process. And most people don't know that. The masses don't know that. The medical field does not know that. So recently I was contacted by a colleague, and she's from the UK. She reached out because she is, as I like to say, she is corn-fused. She trained at King's College program in naturopathic medicine, the College of Naturopathic Medicine, very esteemed program over in the UK. I got her certificate at the Institute for Functional Medicine. Turns out she was anemic. Her son was copper toxic. Sound familiar? And she has many clients with low ferritin. They're deemed anemic. They're getting iron, but they're getting worse. And this book that I'm highlighting here is the textbook that she used extensively in her training, 750 pages long. It is a beast. It's a beautiful textbook. I'm just not sure how accurate it is. And she went out of her way to track me down. We had an opportunity to connect a few weeks ago. So I asked her a very simple question. I said, let's open up that index and see what this preeminent textbook on human nutrition has to say about the most important antioxidant protein on the planet, has to say about ceruloplasmin. Nothing. Then I said, well, let's look up the word or the phrase nutritional immunity, which was coined by nutritionists from the UK back during the Second World War. And the bottom line is, you don't give iron to humans because it's only going to feed the pathogens. Well, neither of those subjects is in this book. And that led to a very extensive conversation. And herein lies the problem. The practitioners, the clinicians, the nutritionists, a wholesale range of people who interact with the public have been misled and misfed in their education. She shared with me the page that really highlights this whole issue of iron and how important it is. And there's a very specific paragraph that talks about the absorption of iron and how central it is to our health and well-being. The part that they forget to mention in that is that you cannot absorb iron without bioavailable copper in your gut. The enterocytes, the enterocyte cells of the gut, require copper. Ding, ding, ding. And again, that's not taught. So there you begin to get a deeper understanding of where the problem is. It's very subtle, but it's very significant. Important context. We all started out in grade school, right? Remember those days? Wasn't that fun? We were taught to follow orders. We've read books like See, Dick, and Jane Run. Those are really fun books to read. And we were also taught how to use a ruler. We became really good at it, actually. But then we went to grad school, not necessarily academic grad school. We went to the grad school of life. We learned how to become an adult. We're reading deeper books like War and Peace, which is very different than See, Dick, and Jane Run. But we also are learning to use reason and not rulers. So what I want to introduce here are three entities, three organizations that I'm not convinced have our best interests at heart: World Health Organization, the FDA, and the AMA. And just point out that it took us about 6 months to figure out that this COVID thing was, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? It took us 65 years. In 1955, Ansel Keys published a very important paper saying that cholesterol causes heart disease. And it wasn't until 2016 when Raznikov and Diamond published their definitive study where they said, enough. We're not even going to debate this anymore. Cholesterol is not the cause of heart disease. And here we are 100 years after the so-called discovery of iron deficiency anemia, and we're still struggling with it. And I want to thank David again, my client, who introduced me to this new phrase, ironic anemia. There's more to the story. But the key is we've got to become smarter about what's going on in our environment. I always like to bring people back to 1984. Great book if you haven't read it. And we all know the whole concept, white is black, black is white. And this is where citizens became enemies of the state. So it's a really wonderful expose. Turns out that this book was published in 1948. Well, that's 36 years difference. Well, when you add 36 to 1984, what did we get? Oh, 2020. So that was the beginning of the totalitarian state. So what we're trained to believe is that copper is toxic and that we're anemic when it comes to iron. No. Copper is not toxic and iron is not deficient. Copper is missing in action and iron is stuck in our tissue, in our cells. A very, very important distinction for people to understand. So on bended knee, please stop believing the narrative. Really, it is a narrative that's running medicine and nutrition. Stop believing it's simple. It's not overly complicated, but it's not as simple as they want you to believe that you can use a ruler to measure iron status. It's not that simple. And stop believing that your doctor gets it because they haven't been trained. I'm not dissing doctors. I think they are amazing individuals, devoted, brilliant, very compassionate, but they're only as good as the training that they've received. The mistake that's made is that they confuse their training with the truth, and they're not the same. So if only one person realizes that they need more copper and not more iron to solve their symptoms, then all of this effort will have been worth it. So wonderful book, it's a good book, wonderful article from a number of years ago was by Bruce Ames. He was a professor of biochemistry and physiology at UC Berkeley, I think for 35 years, still actively researching, although he's in a private lab now. But basically what he's pointing out here is that iron accumulation is what causes aging. And we accumulated a milligram of iron every day we're on planet Earth. It's a very simple formula. Get out your calculator, multiply your age times 365, and you're going to get some multiple. It's going to be about 5 digits long, probably in the 20 to 30,000 milligrams of iron in your body. And women are designed for 4,000 milligrams, and guys are designed for 5,000 milligrams. So you have a multiple of iron in your body. And it's very important to understand that this accumulation is taking place quietly, consistently, and very completely throughout your body, and it's taking place at a cellular level. Turns out that this is not taught this way. Even though Denham Harmon back in 1956 highlighted this, it's very slowly being adopted as the cause of aging. But aging is iron accumulation. So any kind of reference to aging is implying that there's excess iron in play. And what does iron do? It likes to interact with oxygen. And what is the one element on planet Earth, the only element on planet Earth that can regulate both oxygen and iron at the exact same time without creating static? And that's copper. And that's why it's so important. Copper is the most active antioxidant among biological ions in the human body. Wonderful, powerful statement. So as it turns out, in the world of the RCP, there's 3 seesaws that really run our metabolism. We're going to highlight one now, and we'll come back to the other 2 in a few minutes. Copper's in a deficit state. Modern farming, modern food processing, and modern pharmaceuticals have converged on eliminating the bioavailability of copper in the environment, in our food, and in our body. And when that happens, iron rises. It's very well documented, going back to as far as 1928, March at the University of Wisconsin, May at the University of Kentucky. Very definitive studies that when they withheld copper from the diet of animals, iron accumulated in the liver, like clockwork. It's been updated by Jamie Collins at the University of Florida in Gainesville, 2016, 2018, 2020. And then Leon Gonzalez did a masterful job at a genetic level to prove how and why this is taking place just a few years ago. Wonderful concept, but it's important that you understand that when copper's down, iron's going to be up. Very, very important. And what does excess iron do? It blocks copper metabolism. And the number of critical physiological and biological functions in the body that depend on copper is very extensive. It's just something that you're not familiar with. So here's a very complicated slide. Not going to test you on it. Just enjoy the fact that there is a lot of action that's made possible by bioavailable copper. This is a wonderful article just from a couple of years ago, Sang and Brady, and our protagonist, copper, is right up there in the top center. But there are really 3 main functions. We're going to make energy with copper. We're going to develop important compounds, biological compounds. And it turns out that proteins are matured in a part of our cell that has copper in it. All maturation of these proteins requires the action of bioavailable copper, particularly the PAM enzyme, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but major action by copper to make sure that we are running at peak efficiency. And then, of course, we have the signaling, the critical signaling that's taking place all over the body, particularly as it relates to autophagy, is very, very important. The role that copper plays both in terms of fat metabolism and within the nucleus of our cell is profound. It's just not being taught. Very, very important. And there's nothing like high fructose corn syrup to end this party. Very effective at blocking the uptake of copper in our digestive tract. Well documented. And Rick Johnson at the University of Colorado in Denver has extensive, prolific research to prove how dangerous high fructose corn syrup is to producing oxidative stress. What I did a couple years ago was help him connect the dots to bioavailable copper. So fructose is not your friend. People get all antsy and anxious when I say that because no one wants to have their fruit taken away from them. But if we had the rest of the month, I would love to tell you about this slide and explain why it's so important. But just walk away with this understanding. Copper is not toxic. Copper does too much. And therein lies the problem. Most of the supplements you're taking are blocking the uptake and the action of copper. You didn't know that. I didn't know that for decades. I was pretty extensive in my research and understanding about supplements until I started doing the really deep research about 15 years ago. 3 hours a day, 7 days a week for 15 years. I've read an article or two, actually about 10,000 articles, and have learned a lot about where the breakdown is in our nutritional and medical programs. So the distribution of copper is fascinating. Actually, half of it, almost half of it, is in our bone marrow. We've never been told that. Wow, that's a lot of copper in the bone bank. Another quarter of our copper is in our muscle. Another 27% are in key organs: the liver, the brain, the heart, the kidney, the pancreas, and the ovaries and the prostate. A lot of important places for copper. But only 1% is found in the blood. Well, that's where they can measure it. So we're getting a 1% sample, and they're extrapolating all sorts of conclusions. But the key is that 95% of that 1% is designed to be complexed and bound to ceruloplasmin, the master antioxidant protein on the planet that is supposed to be running the show of human metabolism. About 5% is being complexed with albumin. So very different numbers than what you might have thought. And the question that's never asked, because a lot of people are jumping into the copper is toxic bandwagon, the question that's never asked is what caused copper to leave the ceruloplasmin protein or the cupro enzymes, especially the 6 coppers that are found inside the ceruloplasmin protein structure. 6 coppers. There's no other element in our body with that level of complexity. And yet we're supposed to believe that copper is toxic. So we just got to scratch that record. Only 1% is found in the blood. And when 1% is low or high, it has an effect on how it's being used in the body. Well, it's typically elevated because something has agitated ceruloplasmin, ascorbic acid, hormone replacement therapy, antibiotics, innocent little drugs like that. And it destabilizes the protein. Coppers come rushing out and they look unbound. Actually, they're bound to something else, but they're called unbound. Well, they're unbound from ceruloplasmin. But no one is looking at the 99%. They're just focusing on the 1% that shows up on a blood test. So back to our protagonist, ceruloplasmin. There actually are 15 different elements that can interact with ceruloplasmin. They're called substrates. Fancy word. It's just elements that will interact with this protein. There are at least 15 different enzyme expressions. So picture your car being a boat, being an airplane, being a motorcycle. It can do that. That's how versatile and dynamic this protein really is. As I said, 1% of copper is in the blood. What we don't know is what percent of ceruloplasmin is in our tissue. We're supposed to always come back to this 1%, and 95% of that is ceruloplasmin. I've read over 1,000 articles on copper. I have never once seen any indication of how much ceruloplasmin is found in our tissue versus what is found in the blood. It's very, very significant. Copper functions in what's called the trans-Golgi network. That's the actual space where the proteins get matured, the Golgi body, the Golgi network. But ceruloplasmin is also functioning in white blood cells. Very, very important function that very few people know about. Ceruloplasmin is in fact found in the mitochondrial matrix. So at the center of every mitochondria, we have 40 quadrillion. That's 15 zeros. It's a lot of mitochondria in our body. And there's a little blue pool at the center called the matrix. And we know we're trying to get out of the matrix. Well, we want to make sure we understand the mitochondrial matrix. And ceruloplasmin is, in fact, found complexing the copper that's so important in the production of energy inside the mitochondria. The Russians figured that out in 2005. And there are ceruloplasmin receptors in all 1 trillion endothelial cells. Well, those are the cells that line all the vasculature of our body. Very, very important layer of cells. A lot of intelligence in those cells. And it turns out there's 470,000 ceruloplasmin receptors in each cell, in each endothelial cell. I think that might be important, but nobody talks about it. And the endothelial layer is very, very important, as any cardiologist would tell you. And finally, there are also ceruloplasmin receptors in all of our red blood cells, the bazillions of red blood cells. And we have a little bit of conflict. Some authors say there's only 5 receptors, but most say there's probably 500,000. I think I'm going to go with the 500,000. But the point is, Ben Edwards, one of our dear friends and clinical colleagues down in Lubbock, Texas, he tends to refer to ceruloplasmin as the Swiss Army knife of human physiology. And it's such a powerful image. I always love to share that. But in a manner of speaking, what I think ceruloplasmin really is, when you really dust off the system, it's the original operating system on the planet. Before we had computers, before we had DOS or Mac or all these other sophisticated operating systems, ceruloplasmin is what kept life humming on this planet. So I think it's just a very important frame of reference for people to have, because you've never heard of it. You don't even know what it is. You don't know how important it is. And the lengths that they have gone to change your food environment and your supplement environment to mess with this master antioxidant protein. So bringing up a bit of Kupro perspective, doctors not knowing about copper is akin to lawyers not knowing about contracts. Would you go to a lawyer who doesn't understand contracts? Would you want to be around politicians who know nothing about the Constitution? Really? Come on. And it's like priests not knowing about the Christ consciousness. Just, it makes no sense. And so allopathic medicine only makes sense when you totally ignore the known and accepted metabolic functions of bioavailable copper. It is the number one blind spot in medicine and nutrition on this planet, in my humble opinion. Again, the power of perspective. The object is not to know. Any fool can know. The point of this information, the point of this presentation is to make sure you understand what's really going on. So if I went rogue, I promise you I won't, but if I did, and you wanted to create metabolic syndrome, which is one of the fastest growing conditions, chronic conditions on the planet, it's a devastating chronic condition. But if you wanted to create it in humanity, these are the changes that I would make in the diet. I'd refine the grains and I would add more sugar. And in fact, that's exactly what they did. refine the grains to the point of no taste. Start to fertilize fields with NPK. What they forgot to tell us is that NPK blocks copper uptake in the root system of the plants. That's an important thing to know. Enrich and fortify the flour with iron. That began during the First World War and really accelerated with the Second World War. Eliminate saturated fats from the diet. Thank you, Dr. Keyes. Create fear about cholesterol and vitamin A. Again, thank you, Dr. Keyes. Start to use high fructose corn syrup. OMG. It's such poison in our food. Introduce glyphosate or Roundup. You might know what is Roundup. And the organophosphates, which are there are about 10 of them that are, one is more toxic than the other. And convince everyone that they are vitamin deficient. Wink, wink. Get it? Yeah, you need more vitamin D. And forget to tell you that vitamin D blocks the uptake of retinol, animal-based vitamin A, which is essential to make copper bioavailable in the human body. Yeah, they forgot to tell us that, right? And this is exactly what they've done. Over the course of more than a century, they have methodically changed, and I'm just highlighting some of the big events. We don't have enough time, but I think you get a sense of the changes that have been made, and it's been very, very subtle, but very, very significant. And we haven't even touched on the changes that have been made in prescription drugs, which are many, and varied and very extensive. So I mentioned that there are 3 seesaws. Well, it turns out that you cannot make ATP, the energy molecule, you cannot make ATP without copper. It's the obligate mineral that allows the conversion of oxygen to become water. When the water is made, metabolic water, I'm sure some of you are familiar with that term, well, you can't make metabolic water without copper. And once that water is made, it releases ADP, which then goes over to another part of the mitochondria to become ATP, but it's at a blistering pace. It's at 500 revolutions per second in every mitochondria. And it's absolutely arresting to think about. The numbers get very big very fast. But then there's something called uric acid. You may have heard of it. Oh, I had an uncle who used to get gout. And turns out you cannot make uric acid without iron. The enzyme that creates it is activated by iron. Uric acid is what makes our blood very viscous and thick. For those of you who have wondered why it takes you so long to do a blood donation, you've got too much uric acid in your system. And the most important thing is to know that if you're not making ATP, you're making uric acid. It's a trade-off, one way or the other, one way or the other. That's how powerful this dynamic between copper and iron is. And then there's a seesaw in the middle, which drives everyone crazy because they didn't know that vitamin D had a partner inside the body. And it's very, very important to our health and well-being. When vitamin A is down, the bioavailability of copper will be down. The energy production will be down. When does vitamin A get down? When is it restricted in its uptake? When people are focusing on just vitamin D. So it's very simple. Get out your great-grandfather or great-grandmother's bottle of cod liver oil, and it has both vitamin A and D in proper ratio that Mother Nature understands and really wants us to have access to. So vitamin D will block vitamin A, and then you're going to have problems. The dynamic of vitamin A to being supporting the process of making ATP. Hammerling 2016 is an amazing study for those of you who are gearheads and love to get into the research. And there's also a relationship between vitamin D and uric acid. What a surprise. And as I mentioned, iron is going to be very hard on copper status, and uric acid is going to block the production of ATP. So it turns out there's 5 highs within metabolic syndrome. There's high blood pressure, hypertension. There's high blood sugar, hyperglycemia. There's high cholesterol, hyperlipidemia, and high triglycerides. And there's high uric acid, hyperuricemia. But wait, there's one more, hyperinsulinemia. And this is the granddaddy of them all. Very, very powerful effect that insulin has in our body. And we've been trained to believe that we can't absorb sugar or glucose without insulin, right? We know that. Well, there's more to the story. But it turns out that if copper is in a deficit position, if it's not being absorbed in the diet, if it's not being made bioavailable in our body, these highs are going to emerge with precision. And that's what's happening all over the world. This is not known because it's not looked for. You have to know the code. You have to know what are the right words to ask Dr. Google to get to this level of knowledge. So we're all familiar with motherboards, and the body is no different. Truth be known, we don't have it quite like that. But there is a motherboard, there is a central processing unit, and there is a modem in our body. Very, very important. It's done enzymatically more than a physical format. But the point is that CPU, it's our hypothalamus, very central section of our brain. That's the brains of the brain. That's where all the processing is taking place. 64 chambers inside the hypothalamus, and it's an amazing part of our anatomy. The motherboard, turns out it's the HPA axis. Hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. And then finally the modem, turns out it's signaling peptides. there are 4,700, wait, I exaggerate, 4,699 signaling peptides inside our body that allow communication and decision making to take place. But every one of those signaling peptides must be turned on. It's like your car is parked in the driveway. It's of no use to you parked in the driveway. It's when you put the key in the ignition and turn it on that suddenly it becomes a useful instrument. Well, that's what these signaling peptides are. They just forgot to tell you that they've got to be turned on. They're all designed in what's called a pro hormone state, which means they're parked cars. And if I, again, back to my dastardly self, if I wanted to kill the economy, I'd take the gold out. Wow, they did that back in 1932 and then 1972 in a much bigger way. If you want to kill the copper, if you really want to just bring your computer to a standstill, take the silver out. It's well documented. That motherboard will not work without copper. And if you want to kill the human, you got to take the copper out. And lo and behold, that's exactly what they've been doing for over a century. Very quietly, but very methodically, and not known because not looked for. So why are we insulin resistant? Really? Well, it turns out there's a whole series of these signaling peptides that run the show. Each one communicating with the other. You've seen these Russian nesting dolls. Well, the one that we know about is insulin. We're supposed to focus on that one. That's the only thing you need to know. You need more insulin, right? And we don't know about the other 6 or more, probably many, many more. But it turns out that insulin growth factor, very important piece of the puzzle. Incretin, wow, never heard of that. Well, actually you have. You've heard of GLP-1. It's very, very popular. It's very vogue right now. It's another signaling peptide. Very, very critical in its function. There's something called joining peptide. It's also called C-peptide. Again, these are all signaling peptides telling the body what the sugar status is at a cellular and systemic level. There's something called humanin. Sounds like an insurance company, right? Very important. And we have spexin, and my favorite, chromogranin A, which you and your doctor have never heard of. And so these signaling peptides need to be able to talk to each other just like we talk to each other on our cell phones. But they've got to be turned on, right? The signaling peptides need to be turned on so that we can hear each other, talk to each other, say, hey, what's going on? How's it going? What's the status? And there is incredible intelligence in these signaling peptides. And it's all of these peptides are activated by this one enzyme. The PAM enzyme stands for peptidoglycine alpha amidating monooxygenase. I get $1 every time I say it. So ding, ding, I get my $1. But they've all got to be activated. And you've never known this. And I dare say it's very unlikely that your doctor knows this as well. Trust me, I've tested quite a few doctors. And so we know about insulin, but we don't know what the rest of the story is. And so here's this PAM enzyme in all its glory. We don't have time to get into all the detail. I'm not trying to overwhelm you and turn you into physiologists, but just know there's some very sophisticated chemistry inside our body. And copper is what runs the show. Critical to its action, to its intelligence, to its ability to regulate the functions inside the body. And we're working with the glycine peptide, very, very small amino acid. It's the smallest amino acid in the body, but it has a big punch. Just you want to have fun? Google glycine deficiency, and just make sure you're sitting down when you do it. And what that glycine does is it enables a change in the peptide structure. Peptides are shorter than proteins. They're just smaller. That's all. Same concept, just shorter. And so that's what makes it bioactive. You got to have the PAM enzyme to turn the signaling peptide into an active state. And things like glyphosate, GPS, Roundup, high fructose corn syrup, and antibiotics are three proven chemical entities that will destroy the PAM enzyme. Do you know anyone who has hormone issues, has insulin issues, has neurodegeneration issues? Look no farther than the PAM enzyme. And so when that gets knocked out, a lot of things are going to get knocked out. So I came across this wonderful quote from Dr. Lustig, world-renowned cardiologist, but it's a very disturbing message that we need twice as much insulin today to clear the same amount of glucose compared to 30 years ago. So what he's really comparing is the book was written in the early 2012, I think, 2012. And so 30 years before that would have been around 1980. Well, we're 20 years past that, or 12 years past that. But the point is, we need twice as much insulin. Why would that be? We need twice as much insulin. Maybe there's something missing. Could it possibly be that there's an element that's not in our diet at the right level? So it turns out that fructose, high fructose corn syrup, increases carbohydrate sensitivity. We would become more reactive to the sugars when fructose is in play. That's a good thing to know, a very important thing to know. But this was identified, 30-some years ago. It's been well documented in the research. Well, it turns out that fructose becomes sorbitol. You've never heard of sorbitol. You may have heard of mannitol. You may have heard of erythritol. But sorbitol is really powerful, and it likes to chelate copper, like 98% of copper that it's exposed to. And Myra Fields, world-renowned copper expert, made this declaration as early as 1981. So, very important thing to know. The concentration of glycosylated hemoglobin, okay, you know about the hemoglobin A1C, sugar sticky hemoglobin, is increased in rats that are deficient in copper. Oh, here's our friend Dr. Clave again, 1982. The increase in glycosylated hemoglobin. Well, it doesn't work the same when it's been exposed to a lot of sugar. And it turns out, he goes on to point out that children with Menkes disease, which is a genetic disorder that causes copper deficiency, the copper cannot absorb and load copper the way it's supposed to, and these children die before they're 3 years of age if there's no intervention that's taken place. So it turns out that there's a difference between glucose sensitivity and glucose intolerance. And that children with Menkes disease are the most glucose intolerant people on planet Earth. So what is this telling us? That glucose becomes intolerant when we are copper deficient. And now we need twice as much insulin because we are so glucose intolerant. And it ties it together. Copper is very, very important for glucose metabolism and 1,000 other mechanisms in our body. So this concept is much more prevalent than you realize. Our bodies are missing their currency. They don't have the copper that runs the show. So many, many years ago on Facebook, I made this assertion that there is no such thing as medical disease. I wanted to see what the blowback was going to be when I said that. I said, there is only metabolic dysfunction that is caused by mineral dysregulation. I really fully expected this tsunami of reaction. You don't know what you're talking about. We've documented all these diseases. I did this about 7 or 8 years ago. Not one comment ever challenged that statement. I'm not trying to be provocative. Well, actually, I am trying to be provocative, but the point is, no one could refute it. So what's important about this statement? There is no such thing as disease. It doesn't exist. It's a figment of our imagination, and it's the minerals that are so important. And what happens to the minerals? They get dysregulated to stress. What they forgot to tell us is that when we have stress in our outside world, we have oxidative stress inside our body, and it's disrupting the production of energy at a very distinct and central part of our physiology. So that's what runs redox chemistry, reduction and oxidation chemistry, the movement of electrons back and forth. And the real key issue is bioavailable copper is what grants us sovereignty as individuals. It's what gives us health freedom. Most importantly, it's what gives us medical independence. And isn't that why we're here? Aren't we seeking to become sovereign individuals? That we want to regain and reclaim our God-given right to be in charge of ourselves? And if you don't have bioavailable copper, you'll never maintain it or fulfill it in all of its entirety. So we created the root cause protocol many years ago, and we started with a whole series of stops. Stop taking vitamin D or hormone D, stop taking calcium supplements, stop taking iron supplements, stop the ascorbic acid. It's not the same thing as whole food vitamin C. We just don't have the chance to get into it. But there are countless studies, more than a dozen studies, that prove that ascorbic acid is very destructive to copper status. High fructose corn syrup, I think we've beaten that horse. The low-fat diet, again, people have been trained to be fearful of fat, when in fact it's central. You can't absorb copper unless you have fat in your diet. Oh, I wonder if Dr. Keyes knew that. Of course he did, which is why he wanted to get rid of it. The heart-healthy omega-6 oils that we were all exposed to growing up, stop that. Stop using products with fluoride. I need say no more. Multis and the prenatals, they're not your friend. They really aren't. You've got to be very, very careful about that. And the citric acid is everywhere in the food system now. Well, you don't want that. The citric or citrate that's added to the food is different than the citrate we make internally inside our mitochondria. And I'm also pretty hard on sovereign silver. I think the original antibiotic on planet Earth was copper, long before there was the development of silver as an antibiotic. You know, there's extensive research. And in fact, Puchkova, who discovered the ceruloplasmin inside the mitochondria, she also did a major study, I think it was in 2023, to study how effectively silver disrupts and dysregulates copper in our body. Not a popular concept to think about, but it's important to know. But a lot of confusion about ascorbic acid, as you can well imagine. And what was the COVID cocktail a few years ago? High dose ascorbic acid, high dose vitamin D, high dose zinc. Oh wow. Yeah, you're telling us not to take any of that. That's right. Because if you have ascorbic acid and vitamin D and zinc in your supplement routine, you're going to kill the bioavailability of your copper. It's not your friend. And then, of course, we have the fact that the root cause protocol solves what's really breaking us down. It's called redox cycling pathology. That's the clinical term for people aging. Again, we're back to iron and oxygen playing with each other, and they have a very dynamic and cyclical process in the body. And so the RCP stops that. That's really what it's all about. So when you meet with a fact opposed to a prevailing theory, which is what most of medicine and nutrition is, you should adhere to the fact and abandon the theory. And this is the genius of Claude Bernard, who was world-renowned physician. He's a founder of the scientific method that's used in medicine. He was the original theorist regarding homeostasis, staying in balance, but he was also Louis Pasteur's other nemesis. So you had Anton Béchamp and Claude Bernard. So concluding thoughts real quick, I just want to share that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we used when we created them. Very important perspective that Albert Einstein brought to us. And what I want to do is, if ever asked, I just want to share some thoughts about the Make America Healthy Again movement. And it's just a 5-point plan. Very simple. It's a very different 5-point plan than I think a lot of people might come up with. But I wanted to just highlight this, that I think we should mandate zero tolerance for the use of glyphosate or Roundup in any kind of farming. We just have to stop that worldwide immediately because it's having a devastating effect on our health. Mandate zero tolerance for the use of high fructose corn syrup in food processing. Again, I think I've made that point. Mandate zero tolerance for any iron fortification or iron enrichment programs. It is, we have ironic anemia, folks. We do not have iron deficiency anemia. The iron is stuck in our body. It's not being recycled properly. I would love to teach a course, a 1-year course on copper iron metabolism for all medical and nutritional students. So they really understand how the body works, how dis-ease comes about, how stress leads to oxidative stress, which means that you're not making energy, which is leading to the symptoms. It's a very prescriptive, predictable process. And I would institute a mandatory use of a very key blood test. It's called the ferrooxidase colorimetric assay. You've never heard of it. Your doctor's never heard of it. Why? Because it's banned by the FDA. It's a $4 test. And it would tell us how smart your copper enzymes are. Well, they don't want us knowing that. So what ails us is the pervasive illusion of disease. We know the terminology. We go to Google, we find out, oh, that symptom, this symptom. We know those symptoms by heart, but we didn't know it's all originating with unchecked oxidative stress that affects and drives all conditions and symptoms due to a lack of bioavailable copper, the regulator of iron and oxygen on the planet. And until that Kupro consciousness is introduced, all the efforts to put Humpty Dumpty back together again will fail miserably. And so what ails us is the illusion of disease. And again, a $4 test would separate the wheat from the chaff. We would know who's most compromised because that test would tell us how intelligent our immune system really is. So delighted to have this opportunity to share these thoughts with you. Thank you for exploring these ideas with me today. And I really look forward to interacting with you. For those who are really excited about this and want to learn more, we have a Root Cause Protocol Institute. We're enrolling students right now. Go to our website, rcp123.org, and take a dive into what is involved in our 16-week course. I think you would absolutely love it. And for those that really want to get a hold of me, my email address is just my first and last name at Gmail. And for you brazen few, here's my phone number, 847-922-8061. Thank you again, Alex and Mr. Griffin, for this opportunity. And I look forward to our continued dialogue going forward. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, Morley, thanks so much.
Okay,
Morley
take care.
Robbins here on the Red Pill Expo stage, virtual, bringing it as he always does. Remember his book, Cure Your Fatigue, and a lot of the great presentations that we have here. I want to see them continue, and that's why you see a lot of health-themed discussions. Because if we want to be able to, take that proverbial red pill and not keel over from side effects, we got to do better.